Everybody's on. Matthew, it's not streaming to your Twitter, but we'll fix that next time. But it's streaming everywhere else. And for those of you who weren't behind the scenes, Bryan Caplan and I are planning to get lunch soon because we both live in the DC area. We'll make sure that we are 20 feet apart at the lunch table, just so that we're socially distant, and then we'll eat with our masks on, and it'll be great. But yes, for everyone joining on right now, just to give you a quick update, this is Dr. Bryan Caplan. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University, and he actually this is the second time he's on the Educational Freedom Institute podcast, so it's really great. He was so great the first time. We obviously had to bring him back on, and we're going to talk about his best-selling book, The Case Against Education: Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. Sorry, Matthew, for covering you up for a second.
I'm used to it now. I always get the middle slot. I know I'm going to be covered up. I'm good.
As everybody knows, Matthew Nielsen is the co-founder and president of the board at the Educational Freedom Institute, and I am Corey DeAngelis, director of school choice at the Freedom. Got too many freaking affiliations. I am the director of school choice at the Reason Foundation and the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. But yes, so Bryan, thanks so much again for being with us for a second time.
Fantastic to be here, Corey.
Yeah, so just really quickly, I know a lot of our listeners are familiar with your book, and they probably heard us talking about it last time, but could you give us kind of the skinny, high level conclusions that you found in your book, and maybe even just what motivated you to write the book, and just some background on that?
Yeah, definitely. So The Case Against Education begins with a puzzle. Education definitely seems to cause your income to go up, seems to help your career, and yet most of what you learn in school seems very irrelevant to any actual practical job that you would do, unless, of course, you're going to be a professor like me, and then you just repeat the stuff that you were taught. All right, so why would that be? And the explanation that I put forward is that a great deal of the payoff from education is not because you're learning useful skills in school, though that happens too, but rather because you are getting a certification, a stamp on your forehead, or as economists call it, a signal. So by doing well in school, you are persuading employers that you are worthwhile. The slogan that I like sometimes is to say, we usually think of education as being job training, but that's not true. Really, education is a passport to the real training, which happens on the job. All right. Now, from the point of view of an individual, it doesn't really matter why education helps your career. All that matters is that it does. But from the point of view of society, it matters a very great deal for the following reason. If one person wants to go and get a better job, then whether you are going to school to get skills or going to get the stamp on your forehead, either way, you go there and it works. But if you are selecting education policy for society, the model matters. If kids are actually learning a lot of useful skills in school, they go there and then they enrich not only themselves, but society. If what you're doing is mainly signaling, then you go to school, you get a bunch of extra signals on your foreheads, and then what do employers do? They jack up the expectations of how much you need. What credentials do you actually need to be considered worthy to not have your application thrown in the garbage? And therefore, with signaling, expansion of education primarily leads not to an upskilling of the workforce, but rather to what researchers call credential inflation. And this is where you have the same credentials that the same credentials that your grandparents or parents could have used to get a really good job, and for you it's a mediocre job. Or flipping it around, jobs that previously your parents or grandparents didn't need any fancy degrees to get, like being a secretary, now you need those very degrees. Right? And then the real punchline of all of this is that there's an enormously unpopular education policy that actually has great merit intrinsically, and that is austerity, cutting education spending. Right? And what's striking to me is that when I present this work to a very general audience, usually I get a lot of nodding, even from very normal people that would dislike almost every other book I've written. But this is one thing where it speaks so much to people's firsthand experience. They're saying, yes, of course. Yes, I wasted a ton of time in school learning stuff that I never needed to know again. Yes, of course. And finally I say, so let's have less of it. And that's where people lose their minds. Like, what? Do less of it? Well, just because I said it was completely worthless doesn't mean we should have less of it. Why? Well, right? And this is where people often go pretty crazy, but again, the logic is sound, right? If you really agree that it is not actually teaching useful skills, that it's just provoking credential inflation, then why not just get credential deflation via austerity, which, by the way, is one of my favorite policy words that other people use as a negative, but I want to reclaim it as a positive, right? So yes, you people who believe in austerity, that's terrible. I said, look, austerity is like my dad in the 80s when I said, hey, Dad, can I have $20? And he says, first of all, Brian, what do you need it for? Second of all, what happened to the last $20? Third of all, like, what sign do I have that I'm getting any value out of any of this? And these are all great questions to ask. First of all, when it's your money, but especially when it's someone else's money, like taxpayers' money. This is what any responsible agent of taxpayers does. So when someone says we need $100 billion, you say, first of all, what do you need it for? Second of all, what do you do with the last $100 billion? And the third of all, what sign do we have that any of this is working? Right?
So Brian, let's say I'm a skeptic here for a second, and I'm reading your book, I'm listening to you on the podcast, and I'm just like, you know what, Brian, I don't believe you all that much. It's, you're saying it's signaling. Can you give me some evidence for that? Can you give me some either studies or just real life examples of, this looks like, since we all remember this happening, that kind of is evidence that it's signaling occurring.
Sure thing. So, honestly, I normally just start with people's firsthand experience and say, oh, okay, let's not talk about any big political philosophy or anything. Where did you go to school and what happened there? So if you went to college, so what did you major in? Do you use that major in your job? What about classmates that you have? Do they use that major in their job? So what fraction of the time that you were there were you actually learning anything that we use today? And I find that almost everyone actually quickly says, yeah, of course. Yeah, I don't use much of what I learned. Even people that learned a lot of higher mathematics usually don't actually use that math in the job. So, obviously people are using very little of the humanities or the social science in their jobs. So,
but it made me a well-rounded human being.
Yes,
Brian.
yes. Well, it very well might, but here's the thing: that's changing the subject. So
yeah, let him get to the example.
Is it is it actually a useful preparation for for a career? Then saying, well, maybe not, but something else. It's like, all right, but did you just concede the point? All right, that it's not actually very relevant to what's going on. And then, of course, I'm very happy, and I do have a chapter in my book about these broader enrichment of human life. And this is where I just say, okay, fine, that's the theory. Did that really happen? How much Shakespeare do you read? Right, for fun? How many? So I say, I watch a lot of. I watch almost every Shakespeare movie, but this is rare. It's deviant behavior to watch a lot of Shakespeare movies. So, and the same, how much poetry do you read for fun? It's well, then how can you say that the poetry class changed your life when it plays no part in your life at all? But in terms of other kinds of evidence, more formal academic evidence, part of what I do is just gather the statistics on how people spend their time in school. So we can see, first of all, in high school, it's actually a quite modest share of the day that's spent on literacy and numeracy. There's a lot of other subjects that people spend time on, stuff where it's very hard to see that it would be likely to be used in real life. And then similarly for college majors, I just go over what is the breakdown of majors. Very often people today who know the numbers will say, well, liberal arts have fallen a lot, so now it's practical. It's okay, it's true the liberal arts have fallen a lot, but that doesn't mean it's practical. There's been a very modest switch to STEM. But it's modest for the simple reason that most people just find STEM so hard and discouraging that they would just fail out or give up. What we switched to primarily is from traditional liberal arts like history and political science over to pseudo-vocational subjects like psychology and communications. Why do I call them pseudo-vocational? Because every year we are graduating more people with majors in these subjects than there are jobs in the entire industry. So obviously, most psychologists cannot become psychologists. Most people in communications cannot get into the media because we are churning out roughly 30 or 40 times as many people as there are jobs in the industries. So again, they sound vocational, but they're really not. Basically, what's going to happen is you'll probably end up working in a bank or something like that. So then finally, I also talk quite a bit about the fact, as I was mentioning before, that so much of the payoff for education comes from the last year, comes from graduation. Maybe that was a different one. But anyway, so it's true that a great deal of the payoff for education seems to come from the last year. And again, this is something where this would make some sense if in the signaling model where people are saying, well, did he finish? Well, there's people finish or cut above, people don't finish. makes very little sense in terms of learning useful skills. Is what are we to think? That you save the useful skills till graduation year? It's like 3 years wasting your time, and now let's crack open the real stuff. Right. And again, I've never met anyone who actually.
The pay bump comes right when you get the degree, right? It's not like 3 years, you get 75% of the.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in the book, I also use that to get at least a lower bound on how much signaling is going on. So I mean, then I talk about a few other approaches, but that's the quick version.
Yeah, I remember some of my favorite examples that you've brought up before is that, as a college student, when you go in and you go to rate my professor, one of the positive ratings is easiness, right?
Yes.
If you're an easier professor, then that's a good thing.
Yeah, easy equals good. And there's no rating for teaches lots of valuable job skills.
Right.
There's a chili pepper for hotness.
Yeah,
but there isn't like a 2 fists for you'll really use this in real life or anything.
And this really reminds me of something that I saw right when the coronavirus lockdown of the public school sector started. And I was mentioning this on a podcast the other day, and I told everybody to go read your book, obviously, because it reminded me of it.
I love you too, Corey. I love you too, man.
But what was going on at the beginning of all the school closures was a lot of discussions about let's just give all the kids an A. And I saw this out of Seattle public schools, for example, and they were saying, well, we don't want to punish the kids for the pandemic, so we're going to give them all easy A's. But that's kind of evidence that it's all about signaling, because if it's more about the grade than actually teaching the kids the skills that they're going to get.
Never mind, of course, what this does is punish the kids that were doing their work.
Right.
Everybody looks the same. So we don't want to punish kids by basing grades upon our best estimate of how well they did. We just want to give everyone the same thing. That's the way to not punish people.
Right.
So it's kind of like the same insanity of a lot of colleges are now saying, look, there won't be any penalty if you don't have any test scores. It's like, so there's still a finite number of slots, right? So if you give better to people that do have good test scores, how does this not automatically mean that you're giving worse treatment to those who don't have test scores? But I mean, like the people that are saying this propaganda are so not reality focused, so touchy feely, and again, it's just so dishonest that it's just a.
Well, and have you seen how like Harvard and a lot of other expensive universities are charging the same amount this year?
Yeah. Yes. I believe my own college has actually raised tuition a little bit.
That to me, when I first saw that, I also thought of your book, because if it's about getting the Harvard piece of paper, the consumer or the student going through the system is like, okay, it's still worth it to me because I'm still going to get that piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would argue a lot of the benefit of going to Harvard is the networking, right? Not so much. It's part of it getting the piece of paper too, right? But
yeah. So a lot of the fun is getting to hang out with the cool kids and meet the elite. In terms of how valuable the networking is career-wise, what I would say is that varies tremendously. So here's the thing: there's sociologists especially done a lot of work on the value of networking, and the main punchline is that network helps you if someone either totally loves you, like completely has your back, or if they are in exactly the same industry that you're in. So fair weather friends who work in different industries than yours are of no worth. They either won't do anything for you or can't do anything for you. So basically what this means is that the kinds of networks that are good to get in college would be like, if you're going like Stanford CS, that's solid gold. Right, because there you're actually meeting with people that are going to be able to help you in the future and are going to be ready to do it. But on the other hand, if you're going to Stanford English, the odds that you're ever going to meet anyone that's going to be in a position to help you is very low, because while Stanford English graduates do get jobs, they'll just be spread out over the whole economy. You'll probably never see each other again.
Yeah. So playing devil's advocate again, Bryan, I understand your point on signaling. I buy it. You've convinced me. But, isn't there a true benefit in signaling? And isn't this the economically efficient outcome, because employers are using this information and they need that information to hire the right person? And so, look, this whole signaling thing is evidence that the market is working in higher education and education in general. What's your response?
I've heard several economists tell me this. Here's the thing. All levels of government are paying over $1 trillion in subsidies to the status quo right now. This is not just a finger on the scale. This is their full body weight is on the scale of status quo. So to say that this shows that the current system passes the market test is absolute madness. This is like saying that football stadiums are passing the market test when they get 90% subsidies from government. Like, it's the exact opposite of passing the market test. This is a very strong sign that you are failing the market test, as if you're getting an enormous amount of subsidies. It's a sign that you probably wouldn't be able to stay in business without that government money. So yeah, it is not true that this is in any way shown to be the most efficient system or even a tolerable system. All it really shows, I say, is that when the government puts almost all of its money, an enormous amount of resources in favor of it, then it's doing well. But again, that doesn't mean that it's a good system at all. It just means that if there's this massive amount of support from government, then this is what we see. So again, of course, you could say, well, isn't there some value signaling? Yes, there's some value. But again, the idea that there isn't a better way out there, well, like, we won't know until we withdraw the subsidies and see, right? And there actually is great evidence that when the cost of education goes up, that people stop doing the standard thing to a large degree. Most of this research, by the way, is done by people who want to argue for more government funding. And they say, look, if we just give more funding, tuition will be lower and more kids will go to college. And I say, yeah, I think all this work is valid, but we just need to reverse the goal to cutting funding so fewer people go.
Yeah, when I think about this conversation, I always bring up things like Praxis, where they're trying to build people's portfolios up to have a different type of signal on the market as well. So there of course the bachelor's degree is a type of signal, but is it a very good signal? Is it a powerful signal? Is it giving employers a lot of information? I mean, it seems to me that it gives employers the information that you're the type of person that will jump through the hoops for a couple of years. But I can imagine a different system where you show the employer all the work that you've done, and maybe that's a more powerful signal to the employer. Maybe
so that's a good point. That was the question I was going to ask you, Bryan, and I'll just add my little 2 cents to that, because that's where I wanted to go anyway. You've pointed out what's wrong, and this all begs the question, well, what's the right thing to do then? Mm-hmm. What is the right system? What is a valid, feasible, viable replacement for the signaling that we do now?
Right. Sorry.
I do that with my dog all the time, Bryan. No worries.
Yes. So again, to repeat, the number one policy reform that I push is austerity, cutting, less government funding, keep cutting until we see what happens when the subsidies have been withdrawn sufficiently. So, I'd say that when there's no longer any government funding, then we can see what actually passes the market test. Until then, we can only speculate, right? And again, of course, this does freak people out, because they're immediately thinking, what's going to happen with all of the students that can't afford to go anymore? And I say, yes, okay, that's part of what's going on. There's also the students who don't need to go anymore because now employers take you seriously without a degree. Right, so that is the subtle side of austerity, is realizing that it's not just a matter of being able to go, but it's being able to go compared to what other people are doing. That is crucial. Now, in my book, I also do talk about what I think is the most promising way to change the way that government spends money, and that is more for vocational education. I think that is both unpopular, but really has shown itself to work very well in a lot of other countries to take it seriously. So I do talk about that too. But again, truly the cause nearest and dearest to my heart is just simple austerity, cutting spending, saying, what do you need this money for? It doesn't seem like people are getting good value. And if you say that you have a much better way of spending the money, then great. I'll cut the funding, and then you improve, and then maybe get your money back. How about that?
Right.
I'm with you. So how about a big part of this conversation with COVID-19 is that we're seeing a lot of people switch to homeschooling. I mean, a lot of people experienced homeschooling in some way or another during the spring, or at least home-based education. Do you think homeschoolers overall can get a better education and have more actual skills than jumping through hoops for 12 years, 13 years in the K-12 system?
Yeah, so I say is that it depends very much on the parent and the child, right? So though I homeschool, I recognize that it's not for everyone and it works well for some people, not for others. What I would say is under the current circumstances, if your only alternative is Zoom school, then I think homeschooling is a no-brainer, especially if your kids are under, say, 10. So, I mean, right now, if you send your kindergartner to Zoom school, you're going to have to be sitting there monitoring that kid virtually the entire time. So given that you're already doing that, why not just turn off the camera and teach the kid yourself? Like, you don't know your ABCs, you don't know arithmetic, right? And then it's way less boring because you're actually doing something yourself. You're interacting with your kid. And yes, you can get a lot more done in a much shorter amount of time. At minimum, you get rid of all of the dead time when your kid understands, but other kids don't. And you also get rid of the wasted time when your kid is behind and they aren't following. So when you are homeschooling, like under the current environment, I would recommend it to almost anyone who's got kids under 10, and actually probably most people in general, because even a 15-year-old, how much is a 15-year-old going to be really actually paying attention versus checking their phone or texting their friends or whatever? So better to just go and do it yourself.
And if you're in places like Tennessee, they're planning I think well-being checks in the home, or actually no, I think there's one place in Tennessee actually that is sending a letter to the parents saying that they cannot watch over their shoulder and watch what's going on in the classroom.
Virtual school.
So I think families
they can watch the child but not the teacher, perhaps.
Right, you can watch the child, but don't listen to what we're talking about and listen to the lessons that are going on. So I don't think that's going to get anywhere. But I think you're right that families are seeing like these two options, and it's like, well, one, if it's already pretty much like homeschooling, I might as well take that marginal change, that leap of faith essentially. Or it could also be that they're seeing these other types of things that they don't want to deal with, right? Well, like, I could just homeschool and not have to deal with all these regulations. And some of the school districts are saying like the kids can't wear pajamas during their Zoom classes, or
they have to wear masks,
or some, there was something in the Chicago Tribune that recently came out where I think teachers were calling CPS on families for not logging into Zoom. So I think families are just saying, I'm not messing with this. Like it's not much of a benefit. And then there's all these other hassles that we're having to deal with.
Right. And by the way, one thing that I've even heard from some otherwise astute economists is that the continued closure of public schools reflects parental demand rather than politics. And for them, I say, look, every private school that I know of is opening at least some days.
Exactly.
Because they know that parents are not going to go and pay money in order to go and have their kid go to Zoom school. So it's just crazy to say that this is due to parental demand. It's obviously driven by politics and teachers unions. And the schools that are dependent on actual direct funding from the students and from parents, they know at least we have to deliver something to them that they want. And they don't want Zoom school because the parents can't do their jobs when the kids are in Zoom school. So something where it's very convenient to say, oh well, it's just demand. It's not demand. Like parents want their kids to be back in school largely. Again, of course, there are some that are hyper, but like parents do not want to pay good money to have their kid get online education because it is barely any value. And, like one of the main things I was saying, like when I was presenting my criticism of education previously is, well, at least K through 12 delivers daycare. At least it gives daycare.
They don't want to do that anymore.
Yes, and now it's not even daycare anymore, so it's garbage.
But if you reopen your school and call it a daycare, then sometimes it's okay in certain localities.
Yeah.
And you can make money doing it. More money doing it.
And like some places, they're not allowing private schools to reopen, so the private schools are literally getting their people certified as daycare providers. And then, okay, it's fine to reopen as long as you're not supposedly doing the learning part. The virus
can't teach anybody.
You just can't teach anybody. It's dangerous.
It's crazy. So Bryan, chapter 11 in your book, right here, I'm going to do it, Corey. You ready?
Yeah,
Chapter 11 in your book.
Chapter 11? I thought there were 2 chapters.
No, it's titled "What to Do in Case of a Global Pandemic."
Yeah.
So tell us, what is it? What is that chapter? What does it look like? What does Bryan Caplan say?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say what I say for everything else, which is I think that the response has been a gross exaggeration of anything reasonable, right? So if COVID is much more serious than flu, right? So if we did for COVID what we do for flu, there'd probably be 10 years worth of fatalities in a single year. So what I say is, look, all right, fine. So it's more serious than flu. So let's do, say, 10 times what we do about flu. In practice, we've probably done about 1,000 times as much as we would do for flu. Mm-hmm. So again, I say that's a reasonable benchmark. So it's something where if 100,000 people die in a year for flu, there'll be a bit of propaganda saying get flu shots. Maybe there'll be some subsidized flu shots. So like you might go and have like a vaccine van going by. You might have a little bit of social pressure saying, "Oh, did you get your flu shot?" And we do 10 times that, and then we're done, and the chips fall where they may. That's I think a generally reasonable view. Obviously, highly unpopular, but it always comes down to there's a bunch of familiar risks that we accept that lead to very large numbers of deaths every year, right? And no one seems to have any interest in shutting down society because of all the familiar risks. But a new risk comes along, and then people have a very different reaction.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the unknown, right?
Like you can have massive deaths from coal mining, and people just say, well, coal mining, people get black lung. But you talk about building a nuclear power plant with an expected body count of 0.1 person per century, and people lose their minds. Radiation. Oh, what if there's a meltdown? Oh, what is So that's the way that I think about all risk. Is we need to be super hard-headed, cold-hearted, quantitative people, and just say, look, life is risk. You can't anytime you drive to the store, you are putting your life in danger to a very, very small amount. And when we decide upon any kind of appropriate response to risk, tell me the freaking numbers every time. Don't give me stories. Don't try to make me sad. If you're trying to make me feel sad, I know that you are not a reliable person to talk to about this. People like you need to be ignored.
Come on, Bryan. It's my family member, though.
Yes, you take your kid to the store. You're betting your kid's life that you can get to the store and back alive. Right. I mean, what's interesting is my first 2 kids were twins. I remembered when, I always knew every time I crossed the street, I'm risking my life. And then I've got these 2 twins in a twin stroller, and thinking, okay, now I'm risking 3 lives when I cross the street.
Yeah.
What do? Yeah. I look one extra time, and then I cross the street, which is what a reasonable person does.
This kind of reminds me of the whole notion where people are more afraid of riding on airplanes, right, and yes, flying, even though the risk is lower than driving in a car, and it might have something to do with control. I guess it's just fear of the unknown or something.
Yeah, there's a whole psychological literature on how people respond to risk. And again, it's basically just a list of cognitive failings of human beings. We like new risks. People are much more nervous about new risks than old risks of the same severity. They're much more nervous about weird, sort of like invisible risks, like radiation. It's like, ooh, it's radiation. It can't be seen. Whereas like coal smoke, it's like, oh, well, it's like just regular old coal smoke. It's not invisible, right? You have things like that. And of course, a lot of this is driven by sheer conformity. If other people are worried about it, I'm worried about it too, right? Mm-hmm. My colleague Robin Hanson was pointing out how, initially there were pressure to wear a mask and gloves. Now the gloves have almost disappeared outside of people working in jobs, right? And is this because of any actual science saying that gloves weren't effective? So I follow the science fairly closely. I don't see any evidence that anyone has come up with any new evidence on the effectiveness of gloves. It's more of, well, other people doing masks, so I have to have a mask. Other people don't do gloves, so I don't need to do gloves. It's like you realize these people don't know any science, right? Like all they're doing is copying other ignorant people. So what does that prove? But normal human beings respond to risk in this very sheeply way.
Yeah, but I like that you pointed out the difference, between sectors here. And I think that's really important for this podcast, that we have a lot of other sectors reopening and actually fighting to reopen so that they can stay in business. You can see the daycares reopening, but then when it comes to the sectors that get your money either way, public school sector, and it's not that they're bad
Yep.
people. It could be that they're actually afraid. A large majority of them, it could be, but they have an incentive structure that's set up to stay home and work right from home instead of going in person.
Right, and of course, and precisely because they're getting the money either way, there's also no effort to come up with a reasonable compromise of saying, well, we'll have Zoom school taught by teachers that are over 55 years old, or that have a demonstrable health care and documented severe health risk, and we'll assign those to go and teach the kids that are too scared. And then we'll go and put the other teachers together with the kids that aren't too scared, and we'll try to make people reasonably happy and reasonably safe. And to say and reasonably safe is all that we should ever shoot for in life. Anyone who tells you that we should be totally safe is just is, as the Roman emperor, Justinian the Apostate said, is a deluded man trying to delude you.
So we have a question here from Kelly. Kelly Smith. We had him on our podcast a couple of months ago. Great conversation. He has a question here for you, Bryan. How much of K-12 is signaling versus other things? You have any thoughts on that? Yeah.
So in my book, the youngest grades that I talk about in any depth where I've got any decent data is high school. For high school, I would say that typical high school student doesn't, they need some structure in their lives, but it doesn't need to be school. They can be working a job, for example, doing an apprenticeship, something like that. So I'd say that once you're at that age, the amount of daycare that you really need is modest. Right, so maybe they'll get in trouble, or if they don't have someplace to be, but it's not like they need to be protected from lighting themselves on fire. Often, anyway. For the younger kids, I think the youngest kids, it is much more about daycare. Although even there, what's interesting is since education is so cumulative, where you need the elementary school to do middle school, you need the middle school to do high school, you need the high school to do college. So sort of the main question to keep in mind is what would happen in within the normal system to someone who just says, I'm refusing to do some classes. Right. And It varies, but a lot of times they'll just say, look, you just can't graduate. You can't be part of this. So in that case, I would say that even when it might not seem like there's really much signaling going on, there's sort of like a derived signaling where this is the signal to signal to signal. So ultimately, like the art and music that you have to do in fourth grade, really, it's something where if you simply refuse to do it, this will cause a chain reaction of problems for you in life, all the way down to, well, you can't be in the honors classes, and therefore you can't go to a good college.
Yeah. So Bryan, you have a lot of experience with the homeschooling your children. If you were giving me advice for if I wanted to start homeschooling children tomorrow, what are your recommendations? Maybe top 3 or just maybe a couple.
Yeah. So to my mind, there are 2 purposes of homeschooling. First of all, to prepare the child for an independent adult life. And second of all, to let them have a good childhood. So those are the 2 guiding principles that I always have in mind. And in order to actually figure out what's right for your kid when applying these principles, you got to figure out what would the kid be interested in? What is he good at? So, for some kids, they might say this kid just loves being around a construction site. In that case, so this kid needs to be able to read and write and do some math and even some geometry if you're doing construction. But then a lot of other stuff he really doesn't need to do. And if he finds it super boring, then why make him? Why not instead go and try to get him onto a construction site as soon as that's actually doable? Right? For some other kids that are really interested in this material, say, well, maybe history isn't useful, but they like it, so we're going to do that. And then there's everything in between. In terms of general advice, so there's a very wide range of what homeschooling is. So there's everything from ones where you teach it just like a regular class and you sit a kid in a chair and you stand up in front of a blackboard and lecture at them for 7 hours straight. There's that. And at the other end, there's what's called unschooling, where you just let the kid do whatever he wants and hope that he makes good choices. Right. So my own view is that people greatly underrate unschooling. It works a lot better than you would expect. However, I do see one consistent problem with unschooling, which is that unschoolers are bad at math. Even very smart unschoolers who have an illustrious background of quantitative genius, still I have met them and their math is very poor. So my view is that if you're thinking about unschooling, I would just say just do a slight modification, do 1 to 2 hours of mandatory math and then unschooling. right? So,
but Bryan, we don't need the math, right? We don't. This is just extra stuff.
Yeah,
We're jumping through the hoops. That's why unschoolers aren't really.
yeah, so the math is different from the other stuff in two ways. First of all, there really are a great number of desirable careers where if you don't know math, you can't do them. And if you don't know math and learn math well enough as when you're young, you'll never catch up. So that's one thing. Now, it's true there are plenty of jobs that don't use math, but you really want to just say, oh, this 5-year-old isn't going to do any of those jobs. Like, well, I don't know. You do really want to take that opportunity away from him? It seems like that's where
roll the dice on that one.
And then here's the other thing. Despite the occasional claim by someone to love math, almost no one on earth really loves math. It is generally a distressing, disturbing, boring, aggravating thing to do. This is like for almost all people, math is not fun. Every now and then I literally love math because there's definite right and wrong answers. And then when people say that, I say, that's why people hate math. People don't want something with definite right and wrong answers. They want to always have the illusion that they know what they're talking about. That's what human beings really want. So that's why people don't like math, is because there's someone saying, no, the answer is pi. They're like, oh, but couldn't it be like 3? No, it can't be like 3. It is pi, end of story. It has been proven. It is known. Right. So that's why I would, if someone asked and they're saying anything of unschooling, I would just say, just tweak the unschooling just a little bit. And then I think you can get rid of the main problem with unschooling, which is the kids are innumerate. Again, of course it does vary. There are plenty that will actually be good, but essentially the main thing I've noticed about unschoolers is that I've met many smart unschoolers whose knowledge of math is like at a level so low. I'm stunned.
Have you met any unschoolers on the other end of the spectrum that have done really well, or?
So, I can't say that I've met anyone like that. I mean, it's true that probably the greatest math prodigies are also homeschooled, probably not unschooled though. Right. So probably, in terms of
and is that
unschooled math prodigy? I got no clue.
Do you think that's just the result of, math is a pain and people just won't pursue it?
Naturally.
The other thing, of course, is that math is like the Olympics, where there are some people, including some parents, that are willing to give up their whole lives to achieve world-class excellence. So, and of course, I often tell my kids, you don't have to be anywhere near that good to do well with math. As long as you're in the top 2% of math, then almost all careers are open to you, right? And actually, the super math geniuses just become math professors probably, and then whoever even finds out about them being alive. Right. Right. Like other things about homeschooling. So I generally advise people to start with the least favorite subject of the day first, and then just do it in reverse order. So whatever your kid likes the least, make them do that first, and then the second least favorite thing, do that second, and so on, and then find the end of the day with what they really like doing, and then this gives you a good structure to your day if you feel the need to monitor them. And also, it then means that they get what they don't want to do out of the way, and then the rest of the day, they can relax, you can relax. So, recommend that. And then, honestly, talk to your kids. Obviously, the older they are, the better this works. But find out what they really want to do, and be flexible. So, I have my kids have a writing period, 45 minutes of writing. But I say you can write about anything you want. Right. And my daughter said, can I write comics? And I said, okay, yeah, fine. You can write comics. Great. Show me your comics. They're good. All right. So that's good. Of course you want to do a choose your own adventure series. Great. That's fantastic. Right. So I don't go and say, no, you have to do what I did on my summer vacation or something like that.
Hey, Bryan, didn't you recently say that one of your children got a publication in a peer review?
We're getting close. So,
yeah.
So
tell
it's
us
an
about
academic
that.
publication, going through the whole refereeing process.
And how old?
They're 17. Yeah, so awesome. I don't want to jinx it, but yeah, I had my.
Well, and R&R is a really good.
My homeschoolers did some independent study at George Mason, and then I said, okay, well, there's anything that you're ever writing, always be thinking about a way to publish it. There's no reason to write something only for a class, and they took this advice, so hopefully that'll all work out.
For reference for listeners, my first publication that was peer reviewed probably wasn't until 24 years old or something in grad school. Right?
So I was able to tell my kids, yeah, you're 10 years ahead of me. Great.
Yeah,
Awesome.
It's crazy. So that's really good. And even if you publish in grad school, that's usually a really good thing.
Of course.
So
getting an academic job and not getting an academic job these days.
Yeah. So I just want to hit on maybe one or two homeschool myths that I call them, or devil's advocate questions. Bryan, if there aren't kids gathering together in big factory schools, how will they become socialized? Because they got to get, that's the point of schooling, right? They learn how to be good people and how to interact with other people. And how do you do that with a homeschool situation?
Yeah, of course, these days it's no longer relevant for a lot of people because they would be at home either way. So unless you're going to say, oh, you're getting great socialization by looking at little squares of children bored out of their minds, well, I don't see what socialization you're even getting anymore, really. So, I mean, in a way, I think it would just be like making people like just feel grossed out by the whole experience. But in any case, under normal circumstances, what I say is that there are a lot of ways of getting socialization. Right. So just, having friends, activities, work, these are all good ways for kids to meet other kids, and ones that the large majority of homeschoolers do. So, and again, it's much more important to have, like one or two or three close friends than it is to know 100 kids. Right. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, like just being around hundreds of people isn't of great value. It's actually making, having closer bonds where you really interact with someone. So there's that. And like a lot of homeschoolers really make an effort to go and get their kids out to meet other kids, like whether it's other homeschoolers or just regular kids doing regular school, right? The other thing is that it's important to remember that there's many kinds of socialization. So, right, our current society puts immense weight upon same age socialization, but what's so great about same age socialization, right? So, like right now, you guys, let's see, same age. You don't look like the same age to me. In fact, no, the three of us do not look like the same age, but we're all socializing together. And that is actual real life, is mixed age socialization of people of very widely varying ages, all hanging out together and doing stuff. And yet we have a system where we put enormous weight upon socializing with people who are exactly in the same 1 year age band as yourself, and cut them off from people even 1 or 2 grades older or younger, much less from adults. So yeah, so like for my homeschoolers, I put a lot of emphasis upon meeting adults and being good at interacting with adults and being a part of the adult world, because that's the world you're going to be in for the rest of your life. So I said, let's prepare for that. And I think it's great for kids to have friends their own age, but it doesn't have to be exactly their own age. It could be 2 years older than you, could be 2 years younger than you. And when I was in high school, I had a Dungeons and Dragons group where we had people up to 30 playing in my group, and I was like, yeah. And my parents thought it was weird, like, should you be with your people your own age? Well, some play with my own age. And then there's like John, who's 30. Then he's a stockbroker. Why shouldn't we play with a stockbroker? It's like, I don't know. What something could go wrong, right?
I love that.
Yeah. But anyway, just like getting kids used to meeting adults and interacting with them. So yes, like my sons are super comfortable around professors. Whereas, like most undergraduates, even in their last year, like, oh, professor, can I work with you? My sons just go right up professors and say, okay, what you said on page 3. Right? That's a much better skill to have than just greatly amplifying, like being able to get along with other kids that are exactly your age.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that has to do with kind of the authority structure of the teacher in the K through 12 public school system, where kind of people go through the K through 12 public school system and they kind of learn that, they're the authority figure. You have to be, do whatever they say to get a good grade, and kind of, I don't know, maybe that kind of relationship is what they learned. And so maybe they take that into college as well. Whereas the homeschool children don't have that same kind of dynamic with the adults that they're interacting with.
It breaks down some of those barriers between relative power. What do you think, Bryan?
I mean, there's probably something to that, although I think it's a lot more just about the amount of experience you get. Because if you're in a class with 30 kids, at most you're getting 1/30 of the teacher's time. So you get almost no time to interact with the teacher one-on-one, and that's what's really valuable. Whereas with kids your own age, of course, you're doing that all the time. On the other hand, if you have a job where you work with some adults, then you're getting a lot of time with them. So I'd say
that makes sense.
That's probably a bigger one. I mean, here's the thing, one thing I'll definitely say, at least for elementary school teachers, is in my experience, they are super nice. They're really, really, really nice. They baby the students, right? And so the idea that someone would learn to fear teachers from like when someone is saying, "All right, oh, you little angels, come along now," I don't think they're getting scared by those teachers. Maybe they're getting scared by your high school gym coach who's calling you maggots. Although, so that actually happened when I was in high school. Like, we were regularly called like harsh names by gym teachers on the team, like every day, like multiple, like heavy levels of verbal abuse. From what I see or hear from kids now is that has been greatly curtailed. So you no longer are just being insulted by your teacher in high school.
Yeah. Another response that I have to the socialization question is, well, one, whenever I went through the public school system, my teacher always told me to stop socializing. So that was not something I was supposed to be doing very often. But then two, there's a lot of negative forms of socialization in the public school system too, like the bullying and then drugs that can happen. And so not all socialization is positive socialization.
Yeah, I mean, and just, so you are often in this Lord of the Flies situation. And one where there's, so when I was growing up, there was immense pressure on kids to work things out for themselves. Let's say, so let's work this out for ourselves here. All right. And this was a rationale for why it was okay for my brother, who was 4 years older than me, to beat me up, as my parents said, work it out for yourselves. I think that, my view is it's been a big improvement that schools no longer have such a lackadaisical attitude towards violence between children. And looks like a bigger kid, he works it out with his fists, and the little kid works it out by being beaten. Right. So, this stuff still goes on. Of course, it varies quite a bit, but at least there's some effort made to get that under control. But yeah, there's a lot of very bad socialization. And again, just from trapping people together that don't want to be together. So, I mean, it's an example, like the old saying that if you put two of the same thing in a cage, one will inevitably kill the other. That's an exaggeration. But, the point of when people don't want to be together, that there's recurring conflict. That's true.
And the cage part is important to point out too, because we have compulsory education laws, and a lot of the children don't want to be in these situations for 13 years of their lives. But another thing is, a couple of months ago, there was a Harvard Law School professor, Elizabeth Bartholet, called for what she called a presumptive ban. I would call an all-out ban, because she said even if you're deemed worthy, you still have to send your kid to the public school for a couple of courses. And she wanted to essentially have a ban on homeschooling. This, got tons of play in the media. A lot of people, there's a lot of backlash on this. What are your thoughts on the whole debate that happened a few months ago about, a presumptive or an all-out ban on the practice of homeschooling?
Right. So it's easy to forget just how totalitarian some human beings are, but they're out there. There's people who, it's not enough that they have over $1 trillion of subsidies for this crummy system that they believe in for reasons best known to themselves, but a small number of dissenters, they want to go and force them in on threat of what? Possibly Child Protective Services taking your kids away from you if you're defiant, in order to make everyone go and do the same crummy thing they're doing. I mean, what can you do about with people like that? I mean, I in situations like this, I remember King Theoden in The Two Towers saying, "What can men do against such reckless hate?" Right? So it is just a demented mentality that someone would look at a total stranger and say, "Do you know what I need to do? Take their kids away from them and make them go to the school that they think stinks." And maybe it does, but still, everyone should have to go and be together and be part of this crummy thing. So short of people telling me about how we should bring back the draft or national service, that's probably the most personally upsetting thing to me that someone can say is, when someone starts talking about the draft or national service, I you want to enslave my children? No. I mean, that is absolutely not. This is the kind of thing that makes it makes me feel ways towards other people that I don't want to feel. It makes me feel, it fills me with misanthropic energy that I'm doing my best not to have. Why can't you just leave us alone in some small way, right? Rather than to go and treat us this way.
Well, I'm sure you heard this, Bryan, but on the same vein, a couple of months ago, there was a lot of play, and this these recordings, I can't remember what was the guy's name, Corey
Dwyer?
Yes. I mean, he goes so far as to say, and he's not alone, mind you, but he goes so far as to say that homeschool is abuse, right? And so, like, just the act of keeping your kids out of school is abuse.
I mean, I don't know if that was Dwyer that said that, but I was thinking you were coming up with the quote where he said the reason child-parent relationships exist is because
of the state,
legal parenthood. Some crazy stuff, but yeah, more recently, one of those Harvard professors was on a podcast the other day saying something along the lines of, some districts are planning, at-home well-being checks, and she thought that was a wonderful idea, that the government was going to come do these at-home well-being checks in people's homes. And Tennessee was one of the states that was planning on doing this.
Yeah, come back with a warrant, man.
Yeah, Fourth Amendment. That's
right.
What are you doing? It's crazy, right? And some people on social media were like, "Oh, I'm actually okay with that if the family can, refuse them at the door." But the whole point of this is to sneak up on the parents, and if they didn't answer, the implementation would be in a way that, oh well, they're showing signs of they're not complying. So
what have you got to hide?
Yeah, that's the idea.
So I mean, just like the level of dogmatism of people saying that homeschooling is abuse. So actually, my older sons, they went back to regular high school for the first 3 weeks of ninth grade because their mom really wanted them to try. And if anyone had actually talked to them during that time and said, well, what do you think? They would say, look, I absolutely hate this. I want to go back to homeschool. This is what I like. This is terrible right here. And you could say that they've been brainwashed by me while I was homeschooling them. But you know what? Regular school had 7 years to brainwash them to think that regular school was good, and that didn't work. Maybe they actually got some firsthand experience with two alternatives and decided that one was good and one was bad because they saw both with their own eyes and they've got some common sense, right? And again, of course, I know there are some homeschoolers who say that they didn't like it. You know what else? There are some kids who went to regular school who say they didn't like that. So keep all four quadrants in mind before you start throwing around big claims about how one is bad.
So what do you think about this whole thing that's been in the news with the pandemic pods, they call them? I just refer to them as micro schools, where you get 5 to 10 students together in a household. Do you think that's kind of a way forward? Do you think it's
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's
better?
I enjoyed the idea of doing it myself. The main issue is just that I was just looking into the liability because I would be nervous about, like, can I lose my home because I go and have some kids over and charge their parents something to teach them, right? And are the waivers actually binding? So I was looking into Virginia, waivers are not technically binding, but maybe they could be. And then, when my wife starts saying, well, maybe we should go and we rent you a space. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to do that. If it's just a matter of just adding more students to something that I'm already doing and I'm comfortable with and feels like something that is not a burden to me that I'm interested in, but it's something where I have to go and basically just change jobs from being an educator to being an administrator. I don't want to do that. And again, for a small school, like if I tried hiring an administrator, then there'd be no money in it anymore. That would eat up all the costs probably. So that really doesn't make much sense. But yeah, I mean, if you can make this work, or if you've got people that that you can be part of where you trust them, like you can do with relatives or something like that, then again, I think that this is a great idea. And again, it's something where I have thought about it. I mean, honestly, especially if my university winds up shutting down again, I am so mortally lonely right now. I mean, I know people saying, "Oh, this is great. I'm getting a lot of work done." I'm like, this is
too much. It's 24/7 work.
Yeah. So this is Groundhog Day to me.
It's kind of an interesting. On that note, you going and opening a school or renting a facility or something, that just jogged my memory. I was talking with some guys the other day that deal in real estate, and on this same line, they were like, "I wonder if it would be feasible for us to go and find a building that we could do some, tenant improvements on, and kind of do like an executive suite kind of setup, but but customize it for micro school family or groups. Mm-hmm. I thought it was really interesting. Like, I mean, already now, so obviously you have families talking about it. Like, hey, let's get our kids together. You know, you, me, and her, and him. Let's all pool our kids and we'll rotate them through our houses, or you always come to my house. But now, like, it's gotten so much traction, I think, now, obviously, now that people in the real estate market or industry are saying, hey, maybe we could rent space to those groups.
Yeah, I mean, plus there's probably tons of commercial space that is people that firms up. So
interesting. And this would be much more likely to happen, right? If we had the money following the child. We have to bring up choice on this podcast, but $15,000 a kid. If you get 10 kids, that's $150K. I mean, it obviously wouldn't all go to the parent. Maybe the parents pay some extra on the side too. If that's not enough, I think that would probably be enough in revenues. But I wanted to get your thoughts on another thing going on in Fairfax County, Bryan. Fairfax County Public Schools, they're not reopening in person,
right?
But they are reopening about 37 of their schools, so about 20% of their schools as child care centers. And so they're charging families up to $368 a month. So you're paying through the property tax system, and then, we're not going to open our schools and we're not going to give you a refund, but we are going to open the schools, call them something else, and charge you extra. What are your thoughts on? I mean, that's one of the few districts that are actually doing this.
And are those for kids younger than 5, or are those for school age kids?
I believe it's like elementary aged children, maybe middle school too. But
you got to give them credit for chutzpah. Right? So as an economist, I guess I'd say, well, better to be open for some purpose than to be open for no purpose. And the reason why people are paying is because it's best deal they can get. So I can understand the outrage of people saying, well, doesn't this show that you are scamming us? And that's true too. But I would focus the criticism on insisting upon getting money for doing next to nothing, rather than for actually trying to be a little bit entrepreneurial about the situation.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is they already have money through the property tax system. They should use that. But if you thought about it from the private sector, if a private school took $15,000 from you and said, we're not going to give that back, we're not going to reopen, but we are going to reopen, and if you give us another $15K, we'll reopen. I mean, that's how I kind of think about it in terms of, and I think that would just be I would define that as extortion in the private sector.
I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The public sector is terrible. It's terrible. And yes, I do work in the public sector. It's great. It's very nice for employees. It's just terrible for customers and for taxpayers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a monopoly. You have to pay for it. Yep. If you want to choose a different school, too bad. The money's saved.
So here's the thing. It's worse than a monopoly. So a regular monopoly, like if you have a monopoly over oil, you're still trying to figure out ways to extract oil more cheaply. You're still trying to figure out ways to get the quality up so you can charge a higher price. What we have here is a nonprofit monopoly funded by taxes, right? So then that is really bad. And I would say it's really the real problem is just the nonprofit status. The fact that they get their money regardless of whether or not the customers are happy. So, I mean, that's where they can do what they can do almost anything they want. And if people don't like it, too bad. We'll take your home if you stop paying the property taxes.
I mean, this is kind of how Milton Friedman talked about private versus public monopolies, right? Where he made the argument that private monopolies are better because at least you're not compelled to pay for them, right? Private monopolies are more likely to be replaced.
Yes, there's not a gun to your head.
Yeah, that's all true. And private monopolies. Also, they still have a reason to try to control costs. So, because if a private monopoly lets a union double the pay of the workers, the business loses money. So they don't want to do that. They still want to go and figure out ways of saving money. They're looking for new opportunities. So that part's all good. So it's really or think about this. You could also think about them as being similar to a regulated monopoly where you're the only seller. And you're not, there's a certain amount there's a certain price you can charge, and then, right, and then that's if you come up with any way of doing better, then we just We don't actually let anyone keep that money. So, like if you're the principal of a school and you figure out a way to make extra money, it's not like you can take that money home as a bonus. Right?
Nope.
This is the way the nonprofit sector works, is that, essentially, so there's been quite a bit of work done on like public sector compensation. And the big punchline, if you just look at cash, then it doesn't seem like they're getting paid that well overall. But if you look at benefits, that's where the whole package is great for the public sector, is cash plus benefits. And then if you start thinking about the unpriced benefits, things like job security, things like during a pandemic, you don't have to come to work. That's where the disparity becomes truly immense. And you realize that the public sector is very heavily designed around showing great favoritism to the workers at the expense of customers and taxpayers.
Yeah, I think the one recent report that I saw on this was that like government employees, they have like a less than 1% unsatisfactory rating, even though a lot of people have different feelings about, of course there's more than 1% that are unsatisfactory, but they have such job security. It's just like, okay, cool, you showed up to work, boom.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when their managers evaluate them, almost everyone's satisfactory.
It's the same thing with teachers, but it's also the same thing with other public sector workers. It's not only like an education thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is a general bias for any kind of evaluation of just saying someone you work with is doing a good job, even in the private sector, but it's not as bad. The private sector, you might say 1 out of 10 people isn't cutting it, which is, however, 10 times as much as in the public sector, say.
Yeah, so Bryan, we're coming up to an hour, and we don't want to take your whole day. We could talk with you for the next 3 hours, but it is a Friday evening, and we want you to be able to spend some time with your family as well. I want to wrap up with maybe some of your last thoughts on either, whatever you want to. It's your conclusion. You conclude however you want, but if you want to loop your book back in again, just to let everybody know, this is George Mason University economist Bryan Caplan. This is his best-selling book. Everybody should read it. The Case Against Education: Why the Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. I think it's extremely relevant now. But Bryan, do you want to conclude with any thoughts in particular related to the book, or anything you really want to conclude with?
Yeah, I guess, here's the main thing I want to say. So in the book, like I said, the main thing that I push for in terms of reform is less, or what I call austerity. Just cutting government spending on education. All right. Now, as I said, whenever I present the argument of the book, I have people, very normal people, nodding in agreement. People who would normally be very strongly opposed to anything I'm saying. But when I'm saying, yes, well, most of what you learn in school isn't really useful. You people forget almost everything they learn, and it's very wasteful. And nod, yes. And then I say, and therefore let's have less. And this is where people lose their minds, right? And say, no, we have to fix it, right? And my response is always, look, if it was easy to fix, it would have been fixed already. It was easy to fix, it would have been fixed already. So either there isn't any good way of fixing it, or the system is just so corrupt that we know how to fix it and they don't do it. Either way, just saying let's fix the system that exists is naive, and far better just to cut. Any dummy knows how to cut spending. We don't require a lot of. We don't need to read a lot. We don't have to think a lot. Let's just cut back on this and spend less money on it because we're not getting good value for it. But what I would say is, however controversial my program there for austerity sounds to you, now you've got to admit it makes sense. If the schools are only giving you crummy Zoom school, if you have to sit around and be an unpaid employee of the school while your kid watches a computer screen, why should you be paying anything for this worthless product? This is junk. Nobody would pay their own money for this stuff. At least almost no one would pay their own money for this stuff. So if you doubted the case for austerity before, doubt no longer. This is science. We should cut the funding for education until we get something useful for it, and we're not going to get that until we actually go and take their money away from them.
Hey, Bryan, you have actually a really excellent point there. I just got my property tax bill here in DC, and the public school system isn't starting until at least November 7th here. So, darn, why did I send my money to them? But yeah, you're right. It's the same amount of money, and they're not even really reopening the service. Doesn't make any sense.
Yep. So as bad as it is paying taxes for crummy government services, paying taxes for bupkis
It's becoming
even worse.
It's clearer now than ever, right? That things aren't even reopening.
Maybe they'll shut down the roads and still have the gas tax.
Right.
All right, Bryan, thank you so much. Again, just a reminder for everyone, this is Bryan Caplan, George Mason University economist. The Case Against Education, everybody needs to go check it out. I'll put it in the show notes.
Cheap on Amazon.
It's very cheap on Amazon. Why the education system is a waste of time and money. Until next time, this was the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.